Hi everyone, Aidan here with etrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the ADARAC Aluminum Series custom truck bed ladder rack on the back of our 2023 Toyota Tacoma. Now when it comes to ladder racks, there's probably two routes that you're maybe going with this. You're either using this on the work side of things where you're carrying lumber, ladders, conduit, longer items that maybe don't fit very well in the truck bed, so it's easier to put it up above the bed where it can extend over the cab a bit. Or maybe it's more on the sports and rec side where you plan on carrying kayaks, which again, maybe don't fit in the bed super well. Or you want to mount something like a rooftop tent up here where you can camp out of it and take it on some adventures while still having all of your storage in the bed underneath. Regardless of what your reason is, this one does have the capability to do both. It has a 500-pound weight capacity, so not the best for work applications. You can certainly get ladder racks with higher weight capacities, but it's certainly not the worst either. It can handle some good amounts of weight there if you needed to load it up with lumber or ladders. But also there's a wide range of compatibility with other accessories that ADARAC makes. Accessory bars for the top, sidebars on the side where you can mount things like recovery boards, or even just in general having compatibility with tonneau covers. That especially makes this pretty unique, and we'll talk about how that works a bit more later. But you've got all those options within this kit, and you can customize it a bit to fit your needs. The whole rack installs onto these base rails, and those base rails are just installed right on top of our bed rails. It will require some drilling, and you'll see that later in the install, but that method of installation leaves a lot of space open for tonneau covers. Specifically, access roll-up covers are going to work, and certain other brands, depending on how they fit, if they sit within the bed rails and don't overlap the sides too much, those will probably work too. As you start getting into other brands though, that's where things kind of change on a case-by-case basis, so just something to watch out for, and also to be aware of certain styles of cover like folding might run into issues with the uprights where those panels just don't have clearance. So again, soft roll-up covers are probably the best case, and ones that sit inside the bed rails. This is also a fixed height rack, which means there's no adjustment. So as it sits right now, it's going to give us cab clearance on our Tacoma, which if you need it to use as a ladder rack, that's good. You want cab clearance. And even on the flip side of that with kayaks, in a lot of cases there you'll want cab clearance too. And what that height is going to be from our bed rails to the top of the crossbar, that's 23.5 inches. And to the top of our tie-down points, that's going to be about 24.5 inches. So the reason I give to the top of the crossbar there is because that's where accessories will actually clamp onto if you do plan on attaching accessories here. And with that, you can figure out your total height added to the vehicle, so you can check out things like garage clearance or any other low clearance situations. What I will say with that is if you only ever intend on using this ladder rack for things like a tent or bike racks, things that don't need that cab clearance, then I think you'd be better off going with a mid-height or just an adjustable ladder rack like the Yakima Overhaul. That way it can drop down low for those accessories, making them easier to reach, less work to install, and not adding as much height to your vehicle. And with that overhaul being adjustable, if you ever did need cab clearance for kayaks or lumber, you could rise it up if need be. What the ADARAC here will do really well though is offer very easy adjustment for our crossbars, allowing us to move them in relation to one another, getting different crossbar spreads. So say you need them 24 inches apart for a bike rack, but then you want to swap that out for something like a roof basket and you need to spread them out. All you got to do is loosen up a few bolts, slide the upright of your choice to or from the other, and you can change that spread really easily. So adjusting that's going to be very straightforward and be a strong point. Just know that if you are using some of their accessories like the load bars up top or the side rails, that will prevent adjustment side to side, but it also opens up the door to mount accessories in a different way if you get something like those accessory bars up top. The one we have today is a matte black finish throughout, which I do think looks really sleek on the back of the Tacoma here. Adarac does offer a version that's going to be a silver, bare aluminum, and in my opinion, it just doesn't look as complete, but that is a color option available if maybe it does match your vehicle a bit better, say if you've got a white Tacoma. But it's all down to personal preference there. You know, they're all going to have the same construction and weight capacity. The one thing I will say I don't love about the overall appearance and really just the overall construction is the end caps and tie-down points here. They're plastic and I don't think look as nice and definitely don't feel as nice relative to the rest of the construction throughout. I personally would not use this as a tie-down point. It's better off just as an end cap, but if your Toyota has the utility track system and you've got the tie-down points there and you need to secure something to the bars, just run the strap down there. That's going to work a lot better and be a bit more secure. But with all that in mind, the thing you're probably wondering now is how it installs. Overall, the process isn't bad. I'd just say that you should be aware that there is drilling required for those rails attaching to your bed rails. If that makes you pump the brakes a bit, that's okay. There are tons of other options available for the Tacoma, and personally what I would recommend is the Yakima overhaul that I mentioned earlier. The adjustment for height is really nice, and the fact that it clamps on with or without the utility track, you can get kits that work with or without that on the Tacoma, is great because that means you can find an easy, no drill installation to get you a ladder rack, and it offers you a wide range of options, both in height and capability with other accessories. But if you think that this option from Adarac is going to be the right fit for you, follow along and we'll show you what that install process looks like. Now we're going to start our installation off with our side rails, doing a little bit of pre-assembly before placing it onto the bed rail. We've already got our passenger side installed, so we'll show you the process on the driver's side and you can repeat on the other side after you've walked through. But the pre-assembly here is pretty straightforward. We just need to slide a few blocks into this top channel and slap on our end caps. You'll have 4 of these threaded plates in total, and the part that juts out you want to face towards the back away from this slot. So we'll just slide all 4 in. They don't have to go anywhere particular right now. That's what our uprights will attach to eventually. And seal it up with our end cap. That's just going to line up with some channels, and there will be a small Phillips head screw that'll go right into the channel there and act as a set screw to keep this from popping back out. We'll repeat that on the other end of the rail. Next, we can turn our attention to the bed rail, where we can tape down a template included in your kit. Just cut it out and match up the shape to the end of the bed rail on your truck. There will be a circled hole. Ours is already drilled out because we did the other side, but that's going to be your mark for drilling a 5/16 hole. So I'll grab my drill bit, and this plastic bed cap is pretty easy to chew through, so if you want to just use that to make your mark, you can get that template out of the way so that you don't ruin it for the other side. And just pull that plastic away, or just continue to drill through it if it's being stubborn. But basically we're just drilling down through the metal all the way, being careful to not drill too deep in case there's any wiring or anything back here that we might run into. We'll set that rail up into position, and it will hang off the outside edge of the bed rail just a bit here. So mine's really crooked right now until I get that hardware in. That way it's just not off center and at risk of falling. But when you've got that rear hole lined up, you'll take the included bolts. These are self-threading bolts, so they'll cut into that metal underneath, and you can use a 9/16 socket to run that down just a little bit, let it cut some threads, back it out, repeat that process, and just be sure to not fully tighten it down quite yet. With that loosely in place, we're able to slide the rail back and forth a bit, and I'm just going to do my best to get this flat side parallel with the inside of the bed rail here. Like I said, the outside edge will hang off a bit because the bed rail tapers towards the rear. But you want to measure from the front and the back to some fixed point on the bed rail. And that's just making sure that it is running parallel. So I'm going to try to match this up to the measurements I got on the other side. And we're looking pretty good here. I'm just going to double check the other side, make sure I didn't shift anything. And when I'm happy with where this is positioned, I can go back through with that drill bit, mark out my remaining 2 holes. Kind of the same thing we did with the template, where we just let that drill bit eat through the plastic a bit. I can scoot this out of the way and completely drill out those remaining holes. With all the holes drilled out, we'll just go back in, line everything back up, and repeat the same process with those self-threading bolts. I'll just get all of that hand tight, use that tool to run them down until they just barely touch. Then we can break out the torque wrench and torque them to the final spec found in our instructions. Now, when torquing these down, you want to just take it slow, and there's a reason I said don't run it down with the ratchet very much, just until it touches, because it's a pretty low torque spec, and we don't want to strip out those threads on those self-threading bolts. Now, if you don't have a torque wrench, you can pick up one here at eTrailer, or you can typically rent one or check one out from a local auto parts store. Moving on to the crossbar assembly, again, you'll see we've got our front one already set in place, so we'll just repeat that process for the back. And it's important to start with the uprights and identify which one's which. You'll notice there's going to be a side that tapers in, and we want on, say, the driver's side, for those ends to be pointed towards each other. So on this tailgate side, the one we should see is this flat face towards the tailgate and this tapered end facing towards the cab. And then, of course, we want this arching in towards the middle of the bed because the top part is what the crossbar will rest on. After you have identified the different sides, we can do a bit of pre-assembly. That's going to consist down here with this plate and 2 carriage bolts. Drop those down through, and that'll go on top of our upright. Then on the underside, we can just loosely install these flange nuts. Those assembled uprights will then slide into the under channel of our crossbar. Now, out of the box, it's got a weather strip on the top channel, so you'll know that the other side is the bottom channel. And it's just going to slide in like this. Make sure those carriage bolts are dropped through properly. And then before we take it up to the roof, I'm going to install our end caps, which consist of this nut plate, just like we slid into the rails in the very first few steps, and one of our flange bolts. That'll be in the bottom channel, and whenever you start to tighten down that bolt, it'll bind against the inside of the channel. So I'll grab my same socket that we've been using this whole time and tighten it down. Now, it can be helpful to have an extra set of hands, but because the Tacoma is a mid-sized truck, it's not super wide, so you can lift up by the uprights. And since we left everything loose, slide those uprights out to the rails that we installed in the first couple steps. And once you have it up there, it'll loosely hold itself in place, but I'd strongly recommend having some of those threaded plates that we installed in the first step already handy. Got one pushed all the way to the front there, so I'll just line this hole up as best I can. Take one of my flange bolts and loosely install it, and just repeat that for the remaining 3 mounting holes, 1 on this side and 2 on the other. It can be helpful, since that channel is small, to have a screwdriver or something to push it in and make sure that that hole is aligned too. Now we're going to tighten the crossbars to the uprights first before tightening the uprights to the rails, just because right now we've got this dip and we want this upright to be held level with that crossbar to prevent it from bowing. It's important that before you get everything fully tightened down, you check that everything is centered. And we did loosely check while everything's loose here, just kind of eyeballing it, but I'll go back through with a tape measure and finalize everything before securing all the hardware. But this is the basic process I'm going through on each side just to kind of hold it in place. And on both sides, we're looking good. Maybe a 1/16 of an inch off, but that's splitting hairs at that point. That might just be me holding the tape measure crooked. So I'm gonna go back through, tighten up the rest of the hardware on the crossbar, and then tighten the uprights to the rail. Before tightening it to the rails though, you probably wanna make sure you've got your whole crossbar where you want it. In our case today, I'm just pushing it as far back as it can go, and the front one got just pushed towards the front as much as it could go. So we've got a really wide spread if we wanted to load lumber or ladders. But if you wanted it a bit closer together for something like a rooftop tent, you'd need to move it to that desired spread. Just know that the bolts we installed in the first step, your brackets are going to hit those. So before you even get this hardware loosely installed for the uprights, make sure you're on the correct side of the bolt, whether you want to be on the inside edge here where you've got more adjustment, or on the outside edge here where you get the biggest spread. Once you've determined that and it's the same on both sides, just go ahead and tighten it down. And with everything fully installed, everything's looking good and feeling good, I still am just going to take one last pass through every piece of hardware, since throughout the process we left things loose and tightened them up later. Now it's just the final check to make sure all of the flange nuts and flange bolts are biting in properly and snug down. And the last thing you want to check is just to make sure that the top crossbar isn't bowed down. If it is, then it just means you tightened up these uprights too close together. So you'll need to loosen them and scoot them out a bit. But when you're happy with the overall fit and finish, that'll complete your installation of the ADARAC custom truck bed ladder rack on the back of our 2023 Toyota Tacoma. Thanks for watching.